Hello, welcome everyone again to the 16 updates, bi-weekly updates held by SEA Junction in collaboration with AJAR. I am Sciortino, the director and founder of SEA Junction, and as usual, we are going to have our resource person talk for about 20 minutes before opening for question and answer from the public, both here in Zoom as well as live on Facebook. The last 6 episodes of this series are going to be with Debbie Stothard, who you know very well. She is an active promoter of human rights for Burma as well as for the entire region, and director of ALTSEAN-Burma, coordinator of ALTSEAN-Burma. Please, Debbie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Leah, and glad to be here with SEA Junction and AJAR again. I don't know, glad to be with you, but maybe not so glad to share the news and update. I'm going to share screen to show you a couple of things, a couple of infographics I need to share with you. I think when we last spoke, I was sharing, disclosing the fact that we discovered the conflict statistics have been quite horrifying for Burma, Myanmar, simply because we were looking at the conflict figures going up and down and then up and up again in Burma, Myanmar. And we're talking about conflict figures as in armed attacks that either targeted or harmed civilians, and this has been taking place all over the country, both in urban centers and rural areas, in Burman majority areas and ethnic nationality areas. There has been not very much discrimination. The illegal military junta of Myanmar, Burma has been an equal opportunity violator. What was quite horrifying was that when we start to compare the conflict figures with three other country situations of conflict that was being considered by the UN Security Council, we were shocked to find that of the 4 top countries of conflict being considered by the UN Security Council agenda, Burma, Myanmar is the 3rd most dangerous country for civilians. So what I'm sharing with you here is a graph of the conflict figures. In orange, it's Burma, Myanmar at 5,800 something. Afghanistan, so this is for February to October this year. Syria is 6,400, Afghanistan 6,200, Yemen 4,900 plus. So we're looking at Yemen is in green, Burma, Myanmar is in orange, Afghanistan in yellow, and Syria in the blue line. So overall, Burma, if you're looking just February to October, Burma is the 3rd most dangerous country for civilians. And this is something to understand because most of us have been looking at conflict in Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen in the world news and thinking this is so serious, this is very concerning, more needs to be done. And then when we compare that and we go, oh my God, ASEAN and the international community have not been treating the conflict in Burma, Myanmar with equal seriousness. And I think this has to be a very serious wake-up call. Well, if you are in the UK and just waking up, it's in the morning, I'm going to wake you up further with this other infographic. Now, the ALTSEAN team actually was able to dig up conflict figures for November as well. And what I want to draw your attention to is that in the orange, the 3rd column here in orange, if you look at here, the conflict figures, the incidents of armed conflict that either targeted civilians or harmed them, including lethal attacks on protesters, in September, October, and November, these incidents were higher in Burma, Myanmar, than in Syria or Afghanistan or even Yemen. In fact, at this point, if you look at the figures here, Burma is in September, October, and November, the conflict figures in Burma was basically the same as the conflict figures of Syria plus Afghanistan. So these are the facts and figures for you, the horrifying wake-up call that things are actually getting worse. So now as we head to the last month of the year, remember in previous times I said, I want you, please keep an eye on Burma, please keep the attention on the conflict numbers are going to go up. The military is going to engage in worse behavior by the end of the year. They're expecting all of us to be taking a Christmas holiday and keeping our eye away from Burma. And this is when the military is going to ramp up the violence because they have set themselves a deadline of the end of the year to try and grab total control of the country, and they will not stop. They will not have any limits in terms of what they're willing to do. So looking at these figures now, you start to see from the ACLED database for the months of September, October, and November, the conflict figures in Burma is basically equals Syria plus Afghanistan. It is still the highest number of all of these four countries being put on the Security Council agenda. So when the UN Security Council comes out with a weak resolution, sorry dear, not good enough. When ASEAN saying, oh, such as Hun Sen saying, oh, we will not exclude Myanmar from the ASEAN meeting when Cambodia chairs ASEAN next year, he's basically telling Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the illegal military junta, it's fine if you keep attacking people, because that is being seen as a green light. When we talk about, oh, we have to keep the lines of communication open with the junta, well, by saying those kinds of things, you are sending Min Aung Hlaing the green light to commit worse atrocities on the ground. Now, if we were to look at the conflict intensity here, you will see that the situation in Sagaing has taken the worst hits in terms of conflict intensity. It's between February and 1st of February and 26th of November, it was the region in the country that had the highest number of attacks on civilians and we saw that happening by the number of fatalities and killings. And remember 2 weeks ago, I shared a photo of my friend Aku, who was assassinated in Kale, which is a town in Sagaing. The second level of intensity is happening in Yangon, in Shan State, in Mandalay, in Naypyidaw, and in Kachin State. Now, in Kachin and Shan State, let's not forget, there was a war raging even before the coup happened. And when we look at this intensity, then we start to realize on the ground, what does this mean? Well, it means an escalation in brutality, even in places like Yangon, which is a lot of people were not expecting that. You remember, I'm looking at here, Yangon had the second level of intensity in terms of attacks. People never expected that because Yangon is such a big city. It has so much presence of foreigners and INGOs. That didn't stop the military. And we saw what happened on the weekend, where military truck rammed into a group of protesters in Yangon. Now, that did not stop democracy activists. After that, they came out in flash mobs again. they refuse to take this, they refuse to accept this brutal behavior. And I think this is really important to understand, that when things like this happen in Yangon, in Rangoon, it's telling us that there's no place in the whole country which is safe. There's nowhere that you are safe from the brutal human rights violations of this illegal military junta. Now, and if you wanted to have a global view of this, then I'm sharing the site, the link to the ACLED data overview on deadly demonstrations. So when we talk about attacks on civilians, it also includes use of force against protesters. You know, people legitimately exercising their civil and political rights. Now, in terms of the world statistics, 2021 is fast becoming the most dangerous year for protesters. Even by September, we saw over 1,000 cases, 1,000 incidents where protesters all over the world were being killed. Yeah, so there was 1,000 cases, and 1,000 cases from January to September is about much more than the number of cases that was that happened during the whole of 2020. So if this trend continues globally, we're going to see a rise in between 30 to 50% of fatal protests happening around the world this year for the whole of 2021 compared with 2020. And where does Burma fit in? Burma, Myanmar, over 60% of the demonstrators killed by state forces around the world so far have been in Myanmar. So Myanmar, Burma is the most dangerous country for a civilian seeking to exercise their legitimate human right to protest. And Burma, Myanmar it takes the gold medal for deadly protests, because after Burma, Myanmar comes Colombia and then the Democratic Republic of Congo. So if we look at the attacks on protesters, snipers, now even vehicles deliberately ramming into protesters to kill them in Yangon and other places, then we start to understand we must not see this in isolation. We must see this in this picture, understanding that if we look at the global picture, Burma, Myanmar is still the deadliest place for protesters. And it's a constant feeling of respect and also fear and concern whenever we see that the people of Burma, especially young people, have been courageous in their resistance. It's not a case of let's go protest and the worst thing that can happen is we get beaten up or arrested. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't come home. And I think knowing that people go out to protest even when they're aware how deadly this is actually should be sobering for us and should be a source of motivation for us, those of us who don't have to go out and protest, who are sitting comfortably in front of our computer screens, that we still have to do so much more to support the movement in Burma. Now, when we talk about those conflict stats, what does that mean in reality? Well, we see this. Just yesterday, 11 people, including a person living with a person with disability and 5 children, were found burnt to death when they were hiding from the military forces. Some of these young people were in the PDF. They were anti-junta resistance fighters. And even if they were all adults and they were all combatants, this would be a war crime. But what makes it so painful is that there was a person living with a disability who had no chance to escape. And there were 5 children. They were teenagers. They did not deserve this brutality. The military is being even more brutal and cruel because they want to scare the population into submission. This is what they have done consistently all across the country. This is what they have done consistently in the past in launching genocidal violence against the Rohingya, in attacking Kachin, Karen, Karenni, Shan, Taang, Chin, the very brave people of Sagaing region who have put up the strongest resistance possible, despite the fact that this is one of the poorest regions of the country. They're doing this to scare the population, to make them so afraid that they cannot resist. And they haven't understood yet that this is not going to scare people. This is simply going to make them much more angry. So when we look at this case and then we get this shocking news, Hun Sen saying there's no reason to keep the military junta out, to exclude them from ASEAN meetings next year, it really makes me want to curse and scream worse than what I did a couple of weeks ago. So, but I'll control myself. But, you know, I think we are heading to, I feel as though we're heading to the end game. What we're going to see in the next few weeks is going to require so much energy and pressure globally and amongst ourselves to keep this movement going, to make sure that our friends, our comrades, our brothers and sisters in the country know that they are not alone, that we refuse to abandon them, and we need to challenge and push all these countries around the world that claim they support human rights and democracy. All these countries in ASEAN, all these politicians who keep talking about stability, blah, 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 they need to understand that if they don't act now, if we have irresponsible statements like those made by Hun Sen saying, oh, no problem, we won't exclude you. They are basically responsible for the atrocity crimes that are coming. We need to keep pushing now. Security Council, I don't care. Security Council, every government possible needs to start making noise now. The writing is on the wall. We are going to see much worse. They rammed protesters on the street in Yangon. They burnt children and people with a person with disability in Sagaing. This is just this week. What we're going to see in the next few weeks are going to be so much worse. And we need to push governments, everybody. Now is the time. If you want to tweet, you want to use social media, you want to send a nasty email, start making noise, hashtag everybody, because we need to support our friends in Burma. So that's my 18 minutes, not quite 20 minutes. If I continue, I'm going to curse. So I'm going to stop now.
But the substance, I think we have enough substance from what you have said. Unfortunately, an increase in atrocities, which are really too horrorous to fathom. Just these last few days, the car hitting people demonstrating and the burning of civilian tied together is just too horrific. to even conceive, but still it is happening. I am waiting for questions from people in here in the chat, as well as here there is one question. Torture is underreported. Families and local organizations too afraid to report. A family visited son in jail. Every time he was missing another finger. When they were gone, they cut off his ear and made him eat it. Then family stopped visiting him. Who is recording, this is the question, who is recording torture incidents, even if can record all details due to fear? So who is recording? This is the first question I want to ask, also to question based on my experience during the exhibition that we have been holding for 2 weeks called Women on the Street for a New Burma, which had quite a number of visitors. And I was taken aback by the fact that many visitors didn't realize fully the extent of the conflict going on in Myanmar, and some believed that was already over, that already gone and over, while we, like you said, there is a need really to focus more and more and not less on the conflict. Now, second, also based on the experience with some and dialogue during the exhibition with some UN personnel and personnel of international organization, talking about vaccine, there has been quite a lot of discussion actually going on, and it seems that the general view is it is justifiable to interact with the junta if it is for providing vaccine to the population. So I would like to know what you think of both these two issues. So one, what strategy we need to take? We need to find some new strategy, because it seems the news of Burma is not getting through at many levels. But the second is also this process of normalization. So 3 questions for you in total.
Thank you. The situation in Burma is such that the moment you're arrested, it's not a case of whether you're tortured or not. It's actually a case of whether you're well treated or not. It's a case of how bad you're going to be treated. And in some cases, there have been some horrific incidents of torture, including what there was one case in Yangon where a young couple were arrested, and when they realized, and they basically said that they were boyfriend and girlfriend, but what the authorities, the interrogators, when they realized that the boy was a Muslim and the girl was a Buddhist, they abused her and beat her badly and subjected her to sexual violence to punish her for going with a Muslim. So this kind of discriminatory gender-based violence, not just because she was a woman, but because she was going with someone outside of a religion, she was arrested with someone outside of a religion, is quite horrifying and shocking. And we remember the case of the poet in Mandalay, who was arrested, and within 24 hours, they returned his body without its heart or internal organs. It's not just a torture of the person who is arrested and detained. It's a torture for their loved ones and their family members. So, you know, it's the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners of Burma, AAPPB, does document cases of torture. But what happens is that sometimes the survivor or even the family members feel so traumatized and ashamed that they don't report it. Now, there's three documents that I shared in the chat, and I hope Bom can download it and put it in the Facebook in the Facebook Live, in the feed as well. The first one is a conflict fact sheet that we produced recently, just a few days ago, from ALTSEAN, and that's a 2-page fact sheet talking about the conflict, and that's where some of the graphics that I shared with you on PowerPoint just now, that came from that conflict fact sheet. Now, there's 2 other forms that I've shared. One is the PUAS online form in English. This is the form you use to report a human rights violation to the UN Human Rights Council system. And you can actually, it has a few multiple choices embedded in the form, and you can choose to which section of the Human Rights Council, which committee, or even which UN special procedures you wish to report that case to. And the second document is a guidance note to help you understand how to fill in this form. I'm putting it out there in case any of you know of a case of torture, of any human rights violation. Please make those reports. Please report it to the UN system. And if you have filled in this form, then also consider sending it to the independent investigative mechanism on Myanmar. If you do that, then you should be prepared to supply any supporting evidence that's required. The IIMM has received 2.5 million pieces of evidence since it opened shop 2 years ago. And a lot of that evidence has come in since the coup started in February. We cannot assume that there's enough evidence. There can never be enough evidence. We need to ensure that all these violations and evidence are documented and kept safely, because it is pretty clear that there will be a day of reckoning for this illegal military junta. And we need to ensure that these people, including Min Aung Hlaing, the head of this coup attempt, is held accountable, so that this can be seen as a terrible period of Burmese history, of Southeast Asian history, that will not happen again in the future. 10 years, looking back 10 years from now, I want to be able to see 2021 as a history chapter that is something, a piece of the past that we learn from and don't repeat. So I think, please, I'm sharing you with these forms so that if you know of cases, please document them so that the victims are not forgotten, that they are not forgotten, and that these stories that we learn, these incidents, don't pass uncommented. Now, the issue of the vaccine, this normalization, which part of reality do you not understand? The people who will be who could be vaccinated under this junta have already been vaccinated. Those who have not been vaccinated will not get a vaccination under this military junta. These are the guys who hijacked ambulances to sneak soldiers into civilian neighborhoods. These are the guys who either posed as doctors or posed as patients in order to arrest and kill people. If you were Burmese or ethnic nationality, having been subjected to crimes against humanity and war crimes, drone strikes, and military airstrikes, seeing your family members die, seeing children in your community shot dead, are you going to line up and say, here, vaccinate me? Are you joking? Do you think the military regime will say, well, okay, we are a little bit tired of committing all these atrocities, burning people alive, ramming them to death in trucks, and now we're in a good mood, we'll save them. We'll go vaccinate them against COVID. Yeah, right. Can I also sell you the Brooklyn Bridge? If you believe that, I'll send you my bank account. You can send me money. I guarantee you make a return on your investment. The reality of this is that there is such a fundamental lack of trust. This regime has not shown itself to have any iota of responsibility in any shape or form as far as public health is concerned. Even before the coup, last year, the military were bombing and destroying ethnic health checkpoints. People had set up their own health checkpoints because Naypyidaw didn't send them any help. So instead of allowing them to try and deal with this pandemic, the military decides to destroy these checkpoints. Did the military ever say, oh yeah, there's a COVID pandemic, it's so dangerous, maybe we should just let people, stay at home, mask up, and no, they went and bombed them in their homes. So if someone says, oh, it's okay, if only I can vaccinate one person, I can save one person with this vaccine, and I sign an MOU agreeing to cooperate with the junta and let them kill a few more thousand just so that I can vaccinate one person and save them with my vaccine, it's acceptable, then you don't belong in public health. Because you know what? It's about health of the public, not about your health. It's about health of the public in Burma, not about the health of your relationship and your MOU with an illegal military junta. Look, even the UN Credentials Committee has decided they're going to let Chomotun stay on. Basically, we have an NUG rep in the country representing the country at the UN in New York. So what does that say? You still want to side? You still want to do deals with the illegal military junta that's been committing atrocity crimes? Didn't you already learn from what happened in Rakhine State, where we already saw that report that the UN system and NGOs had failed. They knew the genocide was coming, and all they were interested in was appeasing the authorities so that they can have minimal access.
Okay, Debbie, I think before you start to become even more passionate, I go to the other question. We will go back on what can be done to put or continue to keep Burma on the public agenda, because I think it's really something we need to think different strategy. But for now, there are two questions actually related to the Rohingya, so it fits with what you have been saying. One question is, what do you think of Malaysian hardened rule on the Rohingya, who are not recognized as refugees, and UNHCR has not had access for about 2 years? I suppose this is in Malaysia, but still, the other question referred to now is the dry sailing season. Do you expect to see more people traveling from Bangladesh, Arakan, from those places? And could you please explain the difference between smuggling and trafficking? It seems that the media simply don't get, but there is a need to stop trafficking while allowing for smuggling, because people do need support to reach safe haven. Okay, I think these are two questions. The last question about, there was the process of Aung Suu Kyi. She was condemned to 4 years and then later was halved to 2 years. What is your reaction to that?
Okay, I'll deal with Aung San Suu Kyi. You know how we have these fake sales? They say, okay, the original price was $10 and now we're slash 50% off. This is a sale. Buy now. This is a great deal. This is basically what they did with Aung San Suu Kyi. They're saying basically Min Aung Hlaing needed to keep her in jail, but the compromise was, okay, let's look nice. We'll jail her and then give her half off, a 50% discount. But let's not forget that Aung San Suu Kyi and her senior colleagues are facing a whole bunch of other charges. I think Aung San Suu Kyi is facing 9 other charges. She is convicted on these 2. And if she receives the maximum penalty, jail penalty, she could receive a cumulative sentence of 100 years. The poor woman is in her mid-70s, so she'll have to be reborn into another life to be able to serve that whole 100 years in jail. But, you know, that's not all, folks. There'll be a 50% discount. We'll just keep her in jail for 50 years instead. So, and you know, Min Aung Hlaing has got this personal vendetta against Aung San Suu Kyi. Basically, the whole mess in Burma is probably because of a misogynistic short person complex. He can't stand her. It's a woman. He can't stand being bested by a woman. He couldn't stand that his party lost by a landslide to his woman. So instead of understanding, excuse me, the whole country hates you, he decided that he has to lock up Aung San Suu Kyi, make a coup to lock up Aung San Suu Kyi so that everybody will hate him less. Well, sorry. Please take it personally. It's not her. It's you. Now, the thing is, they have locked up Aung San Suu Kyi. They can't, and they're going to try and lock up the whole country. But people are still not giving up. They can lock up the democracy leader, the democracy icon, but let's not forget, we have a whole new generation of democracy activists with guts, with courage, and with principle. So you want to lock up Aung San Suu Kyi for 50 years, 100 years, go ahead. The thing is, you're still not going to get away with it because you have to deal with the 54 other million people, the other 54 million people of the country. Smuggling and trafficking. Okay, I'm not a specialist in this, but my understanding is that smuggling happens because people need to get out of the country. They need to get to safety, and it's a cooperative effort. Trafficking is when someone has been misled, exploited, or forced to is forcibly moved to another place for the exploitation or profit of others. So I think we do need to understand there is a difference, and I think it's mainly ASEAN's. I mean, you know, sometimes when I think about ASEAN, I want to scream. Remember, we had the Rohingya boat people crisis 16 years ago, and instead of saying, okay, this is a crisis, it's because these people are seeking asylum, they're being persecuted in their home state of Rakhine, we have to do something. ASEAN then conveniently packaged it all, swept it under the carpet, and put the Rohingya boat people crisis under the Bali process, which is about human trafficking. It's illogical. And this is the kind of ASEAN F up, which actually caused these problems to continue and worsen. See, Leah, I'm being well behaved here. So I think we do need to understand forced displacement, whether it's IDPs, refugees, asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, people who are smuggled, people who have been subjected to trafficking because they've been so vulnerable because of the crimes that are happening in the country. This is inexorably tied up with the political and human rights crisis in the country, with the fact that we are still suffering the massive problem of impunity. We're still suffering the massive apathy and self-interest of neighboring and global states, global stakeholders who want to sell their weapons, who want their own convenience, and refuse to recognize that what they're allowing to unfold is a problem that cannot be contained within the geographical boundaries of Burma, Myanmar. Now, the dry season traditionally is the time when people flee, but also the dry season is traditionally the time when the military steps up their attacks. People in Karen and Karenni and Shan State know that very well. This is the time, this is the season for military attack, because the military find it easier to move their equipment and their personnel in the dry season. So this is also why we become even more worried, because this is the traditional time of the year that the military step up their attacks on the population in conflict areas. And now that Burma has become and the entire country has become a conflict zone, and the military has set this so-called deadline of gaining control by the end of the year, we have to brace ourselves for worse atrocities to happen. And we need, take your coffee, your chocolate, your sugar, your vitamin C, whatever, and start making noise. You know, all those people who were banging their pots and pans earlier this year, and after the protesters were rammed in Yangon, they banged their pots and pans in protest. It's time for us to do the equivalent. Start banging your pots and pans on Twitter. Make noise. Make as much noise as possible. This is not the time to be quiet. Have I answered everything?
Yes, so we have some more questions from Facebook. The mainstream media is too quiet on this issue as it is on many others. That is why the Peace and Justice Project in the UK has set up a series of news clubs where people across the country meet to discuss the hidden news. You could get on the agenda, oh, this is a suggestion from Jan. You could get on the agenda of these news clubs by writing to media, the Corby Project, thecorbynproject.com. So this is a suggestion that is being made, I think, in relation to how to keep the issue of Myanmar on the agenda. Maybe we can discuss that more in relation of this impression that some people, actually quite a lot of people from different countries, had this idea that yes, there was a coup, but now is resolved.
Look, I think also the news now is about selling views, about having more views, about having more exposure. Thank you very much for recommending the news clubs. I think that's really important. The Corbyn Project. But what you can do is, if you have Twitter, if you're on social media, keep sharing the news that's focused on Burma. I know it's terrible news to talk about what happened in Sagaing region, where the person with disability and 5 kids were among those burnt to death by junta troops. But this is the kind of news we need to keep on sharing. And what happens is that sends the message to the media that there's public interest in this, and that they will start paying more attention, because this news sells. So we need to make the mainstream media understand that people care about Burma, Myanmar, and that's why we need to push harder. Now, last week also, Rohingya community just sued Facebook for several $billion. And even though this may not go very far, this is the kind of publicity that we need to push on. We need to promote. So yeah, just keep sharing, keep commenting, keep making the noise. If you are living in a democracy where you can write a letter to your MP, do so. If you are in a democracy where you can write a letter to your government, please do so. Make the noise. Malaysia, this is where the Malaysia foreign minister makes positive statements and positive steps on Burma, and then domestically the Home Ministry and Immigration treats people from Burma like shit. This is horrific, especially when we consider 20, 30 years ago, Prime Minister Mahathir was crying over what was happening in Bosnia and welcoming Bosnian refugees, but still refusing to support refugees from Burma, even during that time when Burma was still facing massive conflict. So I think, we really have to understand that ASEAN is being incredibly, sorry, it's saying my internet connection is unstable, so I'm going to say this again. ASEAN is being incredibly hypocritical. All of this caring, sharing, people-centered community, caring community, etc., is so hypocritical when we look at how our countries and our governments treat asylum seekers and workers from neighboring countries, from our own community, how they are treated. People are being treated as though they are criminals because they were targeted by crimes against humanity by their own governments and their own militaries. They are being criminalized again. They're being subjected to another round of torture and trauma and detention and persecution, even as they try to seek shelter in the people-centered community of caring called ASEAN. We do need to, if you're living in an ASEAN country, you do need to call this out. When your friends on social media complain about illegal people bringing COVID, you need to call them out. You need to say this is unacceptable. At one point, a few years ago, in 2014, when there was another Rohingya boat person crisis, where the combined navies of Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia were actually towing out the boats and preventing Rohingya from landing. It was Malaysians who made noise, who went buying food supplies and trying to find where the boats were to try and help people, that forced the Malaysian government to change their tune and say, instead of repelling the boat people, they were doing search and rescue. Well, they searched and they rescued, and then after a few years, treated them like shit again. This is what happened in Indonesia. When the Indonesian Navy towed out the Rohingya boats, it was the Chinese fishermen who went out to sea and pulled the Rohingya back and saying, no, these are our brothers and sisters, we got to take care of them. And that's what shamed the Indonesian government into changing their tune. This is the time to do that again. If you don't, it's not just about thinking, caring about human rights in Burma. It's also caring about your own community. You know why Omicron happened? Because of vaccine inequity. Why Delta happened? Because of vaccine inequity. Because one group of rich countries triple vax themselves and say to hell with the rest. We're going to put the walls up. We're not going to let all these riffraff from poorer countries in. But still, this is how COVID mutated. So if we're talking about dealing with the COVID pandemic in this time of conflict, in this time of instability, it means that we have to decriminalize asylum seekers and migrants and make sure they get vaccinated too. Persecuting them is actually going to make the problem worse for us in the long run. So if you don't give a shit about caring, then please think about yourself. For your own security, of your health security of your community, it's time to stop criminalizing migrants and asylum seekers. It's time to treat them like decent human beings and make sure that they have access to vaccines. Otherwise, we are going to be talking about COVID 20 years from now, because there'll be still another, who knows, another variant if we don't solve this problem now.
Okay, thank you for linking up which indeed is a very serious issue. All this concern about closing border, but too little is done to waive TRIPS and intellectual property rights about vaccine. I think we should talk much more about that rather than closing the border to so-called illegal migrants, which, by the way, are badly needed. But two final questions for you. One is about the United Nations Special Envoy. She's going to start very soon on the 13th of December. What would be what you can say about her? What should be her priority by starting? And then what she can do, this I am adding, what she can do the same or differently from her former envoy. And then the last question about, for sure there are issues of injustice related to Aung Suu Kyi, but is it going to be good for NUG to continue to work with her, considering her relation with the ethnic armies and also with civil society, and of course the issue of the Rohingya, considering her past in the last few years, what it implies. At the same time, of course, it's unjust that she is held prisoner.
Okay, I just want to add on to my comments on vaccine to remind people that the best option, instead of just kowtowing to the military regime in hopes that they'll let you vaccinate a handful of friends, is that you actually start pushing very hard for cross-border vaccination programs, cooperating with ethnic health organizations who have been, and civil society on the ground, who have been doing a heroic job trying to deal with not just the pandemic, but also the displacement and human devastation, humanitarian crisis caused by the conflict and the military attacks on local communities. So I think, you know, there is a solution. I'm not just yelling because I'm pissed off with the regime. I'm saying there is a solution. It's already started and we need to push harder on it. So that's one thing. Now, Nolene Hazer is a Singaporean. That's interesting because who knows, we hope that Singapore will actually come to the party and be a little bit more active, even though Singapore is not very known for being pro-human rights for their own people, for Singaporeans. But Nolene Hazer, the new UN Special Envoy, I think, who starts on 13th of December, would have been bombarded with all kinds of proposals and briefings since her appointment was announced over a month ago. So she has also very close advisors working for many years on Burma. She has actually, she's quite aware of the situation from her previous assignments at UNSCAP in Bangkok. So in terms of all the UN special envoys that we've had on deck, I think Nolene Hazer would have the most knowledge and the most opportunity and the greatest awareness of existing networks and stakeholders. And we hope that, we're expecting her to do a much better job than all of her predecessors. But it also means too that the question is, how far is she willing to be outspoken and call a spade? Because if we are talking about ramping up and escalating the pressure, she is in an ideal situation to bring together the progressive or the concerned members of ASEAN with the UN Security Council and other international stakeholders, key ASEAN dialogue partners, to get a comprehensive and strong front happening to try and solve this issue instead of a holding pattern that simply perpetuates the problem and actually contributes to more human rights violations. So we know that this 13th of December is going to be a very busy day for her, but we're also looking forward to seeing her fulfill her potential in this role. So so this is going to be quite important and quite interesting to see how that unfolds. And while this is happening, we can't wait for her. We still have to make the noise, and we have to get mainstream media attention. So people are saying NUG versus NLD. The reality is that it's in our interest, and it's in the vested interest of people from Burma, that the NUG is recognized internationally as the legal and legitimate government of the country. Other country situations in the past, this has happened. And if you look even under the laws, the flawed constitution of Burma, we already see that the NUG has a very strong claim. Now, why? Why is it so important for NUG to be recognized? NUG is the government that recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. If we want accountability, if we want to see Min Aung Hlaing and his cronies pay for their crimes, then we need to have the ICC involved. If we want to talk, people on the ground have been calling for R2P, they've been calling for UN intervention. If we want that to happen, it has to happen with the cooperation and at the invitation of the government. So we need to have the NUG recognized. Of course, the NUG in itself is a diverse body, but it's had to be more responsive to the public and to the movements. It's had to be more open and democratic in order for it to preserve its legitimacy and popular support. So we are actually seeing the opportunity for a genuine reform, which is the lost opportunity of the 2015 elected NLD government. And I think we cannot, just as we cannot allow the threat and the shadow of Min Aung Hlaing and China to control and restrict our movements and our activism, we cannot also allow the shadow of Aung San Suu Kyi to negatively influence what we need to do for the country. So I think Aung San Suu Kyi is in detention. She's not the head of the government. It's the NUG we need to deal with, and it's the NUG we need to support if we want to get accountability and we want to get a legitimate government inviting UN intervention to ensure that the responsibility to protect is a reality on the ground and not just a doctrine on paper.
Yeah, the question was a bit slightly different, in that was whether is NUG better off without Aung Suu Kyi. Basically, this was the core of the question. You are quite diplomatic, I believe.
Okay, you saw what I did there. You saw what I did there. I'm not going to say anymore.
Okay, so with this, I think so we have found out that Debbie can be diplomatic when she wants, and that is quite a surprise, but I am joking here. So with this, we come to an end to our 16 updates, and we will meet again in 2 weeks from now at the same time, 3 o'clock. This is the new time for the updates. And for those who are in Bangkok, we have a movie, a documentary on Friday, on the 10th, for Human Rights Day, which focus on the spring, Myanmar spring, which is very moving. It's a movie, very moving movie. I have seen it, and indeed it's worth. We have very limited space, so if interested, please do reserve. With this, we thank you once more, Debbie, for the very comprehensive overview of what has been happening, and also passion and humor. Thank you very much.
And thank you. See you in 2 weeks' time. Same time, same place.
Same place.
And don't miss Padang Spring. You really have to watch this film. It's by Jeannie Halsey. She's a good friend of mine. She's been working on Burma for 30 years, so she knows what she's doing.
A strong recommendation. Indeed, I fully agree with Debbie on this. It's not only by us, by the way, it's also going to be on the 9th at the Foreign Correspondents Club. So you have two options to watch it. Bye-bye to all.
Bye. See you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.